Now, Executive Suites with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Depressions, recessions, world wars. Washington Trust has survived them all. Founded in 1800 and named after George Washington, today it's the largest community bank in Rhode Island after 2 decades of growth. That bet on expansion has paid off. Wash Trust just posted a record profit in the second quarter. How does a local bank survive in the age of too big to fail? And what does its loan book tell us about the Rhode Island economy? This week on Executive Suite, Chairman, President, and CEO of the Washington Trust Company, Joseph MarcAurele. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Joe, thanks for being here today.
It's nice to be with you, Ted.
Haven't talked to you length since my days at Providence Business News. Good to be back looking at a bank's earnings statement.
It's good to see you again.
I was a little rusty. Let's start with your second quarter results. You just reported this week. Net income per share up 15% from a year earlier. How did it look to you?
We feel really good about the results, Ted. You know, for us, it's really a question of being able to grow the bank profitably. And, you know, right now, all of our business lines are operating very, very well. We've been able to take advantage, I think, of our market position, particularly in regard to things that are happening at some of the larger banks. So we feel very good about the progress we've made over really the last couple of years.
Let's talk about the housing market. Banks, nobody's closer to the ground on that except maybe realtors. A lot of talk lately, perhaps we're finally seeing a turnaround in the housing market, at least the beginnings of one. What are you seeing in residential real estate in terms of mortgage origination, loans?
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly are suffering still from some of the things that happened during the financial crisis. I think the housing values in the more difficult inner cities in Rhode Island are still taking time to pick up. Washington Trust, though, operates primarily in the southern part of the state. And the closer you get to the ocean, as you would expect, quite frankly, the values are holding well and are starting to come back. We're actually seeing more activity on the purchase side of the housing market. For a long time, everything was about refinancing existing mortgages. But I really believe that we're starting to at least turn the corner a little bit in regard to values with houses.
And on the other side of the market, foreclosures. What are you seeing there with people falling behind? And
well, I think that's dissipating a little bit. A lot of the activity and the flurry of activity has kind of stopped. And what we're seeing is that people are getting to the point where they're stabilizing. Maybe their employment is not what they want it to be, but they've been able to either right-size their mortgage or certainly have been able to get back on track. So if you look at the statistics, foreclosures are at least slowing, which is encouraging.
I was speaking to someone who knows the financial world in Rhode Island well, and he said, oh, you're having Joe on, that's good, because Washington Trust really knows commercial loans, because you do a lot of commercial loans to businesses of all shapes and sizes here. What are you seeing in the commercial loan market? Is the animal spirits picking up among business people in terms of expansion?
Well, I think it is. If you went back a couple of years ago, and this is certainly something that started particularly in 2008, a lot of commercial customers, business borrowers, were very reticent about adding to their debt levels and expanding. I think they just couldn't see additional orders and more business coming in. What we've seen most recently, particularly in the last 12 months, is a little bit more investment in infrastructure, which I think is really telling us that people have a little bit more confidence that they can see their business pipelines starting to build. And when that starts to happen, that's a precursor to maybe the economy getting a little bit stronger.
Now, it sounds like you're seeing small green shoots. I notice you're hedging a lot, that
Right.
you know, you see some small signs of good things, but definitely a lot of caution still.
Well, I'm a banker, so hedging is what I do.
Not all bankers, apparently.
Right. Look, I think we all have to be cautious, and we really would be kidding ourselves if we think that there's all of a sudden going to be an immediate change to where the economy is. Clearly, the Rhode Island unemployment situation is difficult. We saw, I think, last month a little bit of a positive trend. But this is still going to be a long haul, and we have to understand that that's the way it's going to be.
In terms of Washington Trust, we mentioned residential real estate, we mentioned commercial loans, but wealth management has actually become a core part of where growth has come from and the strength of the bank. For people at home, what is the wealth management division, and how's it fit in with Washington Trust?
Well, one of the differentiators for a bank of Washington Trust size is that we have a fairly large wealth management business. And for a bank of our size, that's important, because if you think of banking really what the business is relatively simple. You know, we try to gather deposits, pay people as little as possible on deposits, lend it out, and make a little bit more on the loan interest. However, we also have a relatively big fee income business where we charge wealthy individuals to manage their money. So if you really were to ask what is that business, it's managing money for high net worth individuals, and it's something the company has done historically. We do it very well. We do it differently than some of the larger financial institutions. We have really more of a high touch model where we really give people personal service. We don't have an 800 number, and people have an individual that they can talk to about their account.
Would this be people from all over, primarily in southern New England?
It is. Our Rhode Island business is probably people in Rhode Island, but some of them have moved. It's not something that is geographically specific, so people don't have to live in Rhode Island to be our customer. That's one of the nice things about that business, and one of the things that one of the reasons why we've invested in it to the extent that we have, because we really think it's a business we can grow and we don't have to be confined by the borders of Rhode Island only.
When you talk to those high net worth individuals, we have a lot of conversations when I'm up on Smith Hill covering politics about whether tax rates drive people out, whether it's how significant a role it plays. I mean, do you hear a lot of people considering, do I need to leave the state as I've accumulated more assets? I'm looking at more the capital preservation part of my life.
Unfortunately, yes. Look, when a lot of your income is derived from money that you make in Rhode Island, or if your assets are in Rhode Island and your income is therefore in Rhode Island, you do have to consider the tax consequences of living in a state like Rhode Island that has a relatively high state income tax versus establishing a residence elsewhere where that tax base is lower. I don't think everyone makes their decision based on that. You have to realize that there's a quality of life associated with it. If you really want to be in Florida for 6 or more months a year, maybe you would do it. We still have a very significant number of our clients who like it here. They may have a home in Florida, they may have a home in another state, but they don't establish residency because, quite frankly, it is worth it to them to maintain the quality of life that they have here and remain residents.
One more question before we go to a break, which is hot topic in Washington, the new Dodd-Frank financial regulation law. First, I got to ask, do you think it should be repealed?
I don't think it should be repealed. I think there is probably room for it to be adjusted. Again, anytime you have something happen like happened during the financial crisis and meltdown in 2008, you're going to see an overreaction, particularly by people in Washington. The Dodd-Frank Act was very much directed at the very large banks who obviously in many ways were not paying attention to risk, maybe were abusing some of their ability to take advantage of customers. The unintended consequence of that is that it has trickled down to affect all banks.
And is your bank being affected?
Sure, we are. We do what we can to mitigate that. It would be very easy to just say, we're just going to charge more for deposit fees, we're just going to charge our customers more. We quite frankly have tried to avoid that. We think that we've been willing to take a little bit of a revenue hit so that we don't send the message to our customers that we're going to nickel and dime them on every account that they have with us. Some of these things cannot be made up for. It's just the way it's going to be. It's a new world of banking. It's probably not going to come back to the way it used to be. In many ways, that's probably good.
All right, we have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Joe's career in big banks and small banks. Our guest this week, Joseph MarcAurele of Washington Trust. Stay with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Our guest this week, Joseph MarcAurele, Chairman, President, and CEO of Rhode Island's largest independent bank, the Washington Trust Company, though people may know you from before as the Chairman, President, and CEO, I believe, of Citizens Financial Group here in Rhode Island. Was that all your titles?
That's enough. Yeah, that is true.
I mean, I'd like to hear, not a lot of bankers have the experience of running. You ran Citizens here till 2009, and then you transitioned to Washington Trust from a very large bank that's part of an even larger bank, Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK, to running a local, in a large but independent bank. How would you contrast it? What surprised you most?
Well, there are a lot of differences. I spent 16 years at Citizens, and quite frankly, Citizens was, and in many ways still is, a very formidable competitor and a very good bank. My decision really to leave Citizens and go to Washington Trust had really not a lot to do with Citizens, had a lot to do with the opportunity at Washington Trust. It is true that at a smaller place, there's more control from the perspective of the chairman and CEO. There's also an opportunity, I think, for me, who was more at the end of their career than the beginning, to really be at a place where you can have an effect and change things. Washington Trust is not a company that you would want to change a lot, but you can tweak things around the edges to make it better. It's got a great culture. The people are terrific. The customers really enjoy coming to the bank. For me, it was an opportunity to do something that was different, but at the same time was consistent with what I had done in my career.
I mentioned you left Citizens in 2009, which means you were there during the height of the financial crisis, when Royal Bank of Scotland was rescued by the British government. What were those days like for you and the other people in the C-suite there as Lehman Brothers collapsed and everything?
Well, quite frankly, tough. I mean, it was a lot of that collapse, and particularly how deeply the Royal Bank of Scotland was involved in that, took us a little bit by surprise, as it took a lot of people by surprise. Anytime that happens, even though the American subsidiary Citizens was really not in that kind of trouble, those kinds of things trickle down and they make it difficult to get things done. I think particularly it made it difficult for people who cared about how they dealt with their customers to get things done for their customers. And there's a lot of uncertainty within the employee base. All of those things make it tough. Now, all that being said, I think that that company so far has managed their way through that quite well. Citizens has a terrific franchise in Rhode Island, and either fortunately or unfortunately, I find myself being a competitor to them today, and we do the best we can in that regard.
And Citizens is the largest bank in Rhode Island, according to the FDIC, in terms of assets. Bank of America #2, Washington Trust #3 with about $3 billion. What are the challenges of competing against such large institutions for a small bank? And do you think Washington Trust can remain independent? We saw Bank Rhode Island sold to Brookline Bancorp.
Well, first of all, I think there are things that happen and are available at larger banks that you can't compete with. For example, you can't compete with the convenience of a Bank of America or a Citizens Bank in Rhode Island. You simply don't have as many locations. What you do have the advantage of is the advantage of agility and to some extent speed of delivering product to customers, and at the same time just a better customer service experience when people come into the branch. In regard to our ability and desire to stay independent, I would tell you that both the board of directors and I are very dedicated to making sure that the bank stays independent. Washington Trust is the oldest community bank in the country. At this point has a 212-year tradition of independence. But all that being said, it's my job to make sure that we provide and really that we are always at the top of the list in regard to financial performance so that we can make the argument that we should remain independent. And so you have to provide superior returns to your investor base so that you earn that right. That's really what it comes down to.
Had to ask you on the digital front, Bank of America just announced this week they're going to start letting people deposit checks on their iPads and iPhones.
Right.
I've often heard people say sometimes they're leery of switching to a smaller bank even if they like the idea because they're used to the convenience of online banking with Bank of America. It's part of why they bought Fleet, a lot of people said. How do you counter that? How do you counter that as a smaller bank, the weight of an institution and what they can put into R&D?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can never really compete with what they can put into R&D. All that being said, it's really important for us to be able to provide most of the things that you can get at a bigger bank. For example, we just kicked off a mobile banking effort, so we now have mobile banking. We certainly have online banking. We don't quite have the check imaging on your iPhone.
Which is, I should say, very new.
It's very new. Now, all that being said, we need to make sure that if that is something that our customer base wants, then eventually we have to get there. And in today's world, you can't wait forever. Things that are technologically advancing are happening faster and faster all the time. And you know, what I have to be careful of personally is that I come from a different generation. In many ways, I'm a dinosaur. I have to make sure that the people in the company who know more about this than I do, who are younger than me, that I listen to them.
Who are using Facebook on their lunch breaks, right?
And when it's important for me to understand that, I have to understand it.
You're opening, the other side of things, you're opening your 19th branch in Cranston this year, I believe. People might think, why are you opening new branches in the age of mobile banking? Isn't branches, you know, going with the horse and buggy?
You know, it's funny. Ever since I've been in banking, and it's, you know, certainly 30-ish years at this point, I've heard of the demise of the branch system. The reality remains that when people want to make the biggest transactions of their life, which is either to get a home mortgage, which for most people is the biggest thing they'll ever do, or deposit a relatively large amount of money, they want to physically come into a bank and meet with an individual. And that has not changed. So will it someday? There is technology available. We have a lot of it available that enables us to do things mobily. We can do remote deposit capture of individual business checks, for example. Businesses don't have to come into our branches. All that being said, your physical presence, if you do market studies, your physical presence matters to people who bank with you. So we will continue to do it. We'll try to do it a little more quickly, maybe less expensively than we've done it in the past.
But the branch will still be there. All right, we have to take another break. When we come back, we get Joe to weigh in on the Rhode Island economy today. Our guest this week, Joe MarcAurele of Washington Trust. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Our guest this week, Joseph MarcAurele, Chairman, President, and CEO of the Washington Trust Company. I want to start this segment with a simple question. True or false, is Rhode Island bad for business?
I don't think it's bad for business, but I think that there are a lot of things that could be streamlined and...
What's top of mind?
I think the ability to get things done quickly, particularly things that require approval, whether that's environmental approval or the individual building offices of towns and cities. I think anything we can do to expedite that for individual businesses will go a long way. I hear that frustration a lot.
You do, when you're talking to people.
What you have to understand is that independent business people and entrepreneurs are impatient by nature. So what they're really looking for is someone to do it more quickly, because to them, time is money. So I think that's one of the most important things. I think what we have to stop doing is making this a political football and make it something that we're really dedicated to doing.
So it can be a Democrat-Republican thing, doesn't matter.
It should be a bipartisan issue. It really should, because it's good for everyone. It really is.
When you look, you mentioned it earlier, we have 10.9% unemployment in the state. It's been grinding on since I got here in 2007 as a reporter. But Washington Trust has run an I Love RI campaign. You know, you've told people before, be less negative about the state. How can you square those two?
Well, first of all, I think in regard to our campaign, we're trying to do something that we think is genuinely good for the state. I think any of us that live here certainly understand that the quality of life part of living here is in fact great. So that's something that we really feel we can at least subtly partner with the state on and get that word out. We think it's a good brand for us. We think it's something we can link our brand to that is certainly positive. It's not negative. Again, it is hard to jive and 10.9% unemployment rate with things being good, but this is sometimes when things are difficult, it presents opportunity. And I'm hoping that this coalesces particularly the people on Smith Hill to start to realize that, look, we've got to get together on this. We can't politically infight everything that we're trying to accomplish, and maybe we have an opportunity here to really do some things that will help the business community in a way that will help them grow jobs. Most jobs are grown by small businesses. So to the extent you can take the handcuffs off small businesses, I think the more progress you'll make. You're
on the Governor's Workforce Board. You chaired it, which hands out job training grants and others. What did you learn from that experience? What did you see out there? We hear about the skills gap a lot. Did you see evidence of that?
Well, when I chaired the Governor's Workforce Board, I did that for 7 years. It was, first of all, it was a good experience. I worked with a lot of good people at the Department of Labor and Training. They were really very professional and did a good job. I did see that there was particularly a big skills gap in regard to adult ed. There's a whole cadre of people who didn't get through the school system in a normal way, who needed help, particularly after they got through their schooling from an educational perspective. One of the things that I tried to direct part of the strategic plan at was improving adult ed. That was directly related to what people refer to as the skills gap. Some of the other things that I found along the way was that there are a lot of small businesses in the state who applied for grants, many of whom were granted those monies, that really needed them and utilized them correctly. Almost all the money that we granted to people were used for training. Mm-hmm. So what that tells me is that that gap existed, and because it wasn't being filled either by the educational system or technical schools, the businesses were taking it on themselves in order to try to complete it.
Your competitor, Bank Rhode Island's gotten embroiled in the 38 Studios mess. Did they ever approach you for a loan? Can you even say?
I can't really say. We don't disclose things about customers or potential customers. But look, I think the 38 Studios debacle has a huge benefit of hindsight. I was not involved in the decision about whether or not the loan guarantee should have happened. The only thing that I would say about that is that clearly there were risks. That industry is very risky. The issue I would have taken with it is, should we have really given a $75 million guarantee to one company, or would it have been better spent spreading it out among others? I think that was at the fundamental, really beginning decision. That's one thing that I would say probably could have been done differently.
And do you see, is there enough capital available for Rhode Island businesses and startups?
I think if you have a good enough idea, there is capital available. I don't think it's the state's place to provide equity capital to businesses. That's what private equity firms do. There's a huge amount of competition for that money. If you have a good enough idea and someone thinks that it has legs, they will give you the money. But that is not a place where banks should not play in that space. I don't think the state should play in that space. You know, that it's really a business that is unfamiliar to people in those two institutions.
All right, Joe, we're out of time. I didn't get a chance to ask you about the football contract you were offered by the New England Patriots out of college, which I know you didn't take, but I wanted to. We want to thank our guest, Joe MarcAurele of Washington Trust, and I want to thank you for tuning in here on MyRI TV. Catch us next week on MyRI TV.